starting off the episode with some talk of what's going on in Afghanistan, probably the biggest news story that's happened over the past week or so.
Yeah, even though it'll probably be out of the news cycle by next week. You know how that shit goes.
Yeah. Around several weeks ago, we talked about how Biden was planning to withdraw from Afghanistan. I believe it was the first episode of Head in the Office, actually. The situation has heated up immensely since then. So as troops have continued to withdraw from the region, the Taliban has moved into and occupied several cities throughout Afghanistan, even forcing the president of Afghanistan to evacuate. And I think most recently, as of today or over the weekend, they made their way into Kabul as well. So they basically have control of the entire nation right now, which to me proves that the last 20 years have just been a waste of time.
Absolutely, just
waste of time and money.
It was nice. It was nice getting bin Laden, but other than that, everything has just been a failure.
Yeah, I mean,
we'll talk about that more later, diving into the history of the region. But this shit is just an immense foreign policy failure.
Yeah, one of the main goals of the United States was to engage in regime change. That's what we wanted to do. And we wanted to arm what is now the current Afghan government. Well, maybe not for long, but what was or is the current Afghan government with the ability to ward off groups like the Taliban.
Yeah.
And since we've retreated, or we are in the process of retreating, I mean, the Taliban took over the country in like a few days. Yeah. So like that policy plan obviously did not pan out, and we had 20 years to execute it.
It's about to be clearly back to where it was in 2001 before 9/11 when the Taliban held almost all of Afghanistan except a small northern region.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, an unequivocal failure on our part. Like Gage said, getting bin Laden was a good thing. But everything else has really just been a big waste of time. Over $1 trillion have been spent. Yes. Thousands of American troops have died. Really a waste of time. Big waste of time.
Yeah. Oh yeah. That's tragic. And getting bin Laden could have done with other intelligence. There didn't need to be a full-scale invasion. You know what I mean? And it's like, it's such a complicated and nuanced scenario. It is kind of hard to talk about it.
Yeah.
But still, it doesn't get in the way of the fact that we failed.
Yeah, the region is pretty rich when it comes to history and the nuance that you have to have when you talk about it. But if we look at it solely through the lens of what's happening today, and mind you, this isn't all Biden's fault. Like, he came in when this has been a problem for the last 20 years. And even before that.
Well, the fault of Biden's presidency, because dude was in the White House for 8 years.
Yeah. To be fair, Biden has been around for a very long time. He was around when this was a problem. He was around when this was a problem. He doesn't necessarily stop it, though. But to be fair, it is not entirely his fault. This issue has been perpetuated by several administrations at this point over the last 2 decades. But if we look at it solely through the lens of what's happening today, this is a failure from the American standpoint. Like, our foreign policy has failed.
100%. And not only it's like, it seems like we're barely recognizing it as a failure, because we still have yet to grant visas to all the Afghan translators. And I know we're not going to grant visas to the regular citizens or anyone who wants to leave as a refugee.
Yeah,
like, we're not going to do any of that.
A lot of the conservative talking points I've seen in response to Biden withdrawing troops and the mess that it's created.
What about women's rights?
Right, is that they're talking about, like, what about women's rights? Or you don't care about the Afghan people. Surprise, surprise, conservatives don't either.
Exactly.
They're just using this as a chance to hit Biden. If they really cared about the Afghan people, they would start advocating for things like free visas. So any Afghan people that are fleeing can come to the country for free.
And surprise, surprise, we didn't care about the Afghan people when we got involved anyway. We only got involved as an after effect of 9/11.
Yeah.
Like, we didn't care what was going on.
Oh, and we'd been stirring the pot in the region for decades before that.
We did not care that the Mujahideen was filled with Islamist fundamentalists.
In fact, we supported the Mujahideen.
We knew.
We knew that when we were supporting them.
More on that later, though.
One takeaway that I have from this is that I think it speaks to the fact that the U.S. has been losing power to impact world events generally over the last few decades. As you can see, this is not like the result that the U.S. wanted. We can see through all of our foreign policy, through all communications that we've had, this is not what the U.S. intended to happen. So I think that this is evidence that the U.S. power is just continuing to diminish, and that diplomatic measures are going to be what we have to rely on if we want to get anything done. Like, violence is not going to be the answer.
And we haven't been able to solve anything with violence since probably our disastrous peak, which was bombing Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
Yeah.
The Korean War was a failure. Vietnam was a failure.
Yeah.
And this was a failure. Like, what are we doing?
All of our actions in Cuba have been a failure for the most part.
Oh, my God, yeah.
Like, I don't really know what our foreign policy, at least in terms of the Middle East, is going to look like moving forward. But I can tell you that our power is diminished vastly since our conception as a country.
Yeah.
Things have gone downhill. And like I said, situation's been bad for a long time. It's not all Biden's fault, although his administration with Obama had contributed pretty bad.
A lot to do with it,
contributed quite a lot to the issue that we have now.
It's the idea that I've seen a lot of conservatives put pressure on Biden as if like the Taliban takeover is his fault. Also, as if Trump wasn't advocating to get out of the region too.
Yeah.
Trump wanted to pull out. He never did. Like, this was just continuing of Trump's policy, basically.
Yeah, kind of. I mean, Trump always said that he wanted to pull out, but then he never really did. And he never really tried to that hard.
Oh, no, not at all.
But I mean, so it's hard to tell when it comes to Trump if he was just lying for the political clout or if he actually wanted to get out and just didn't for whatever reason.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, if we take what Trump said at face value, which you usually never should, but if we do, then yeah, I mean, it's just another continuation of a policy that maybe would have happened if Trump was in office anyway.
It still would have had the same outcome.
Yeah, but the difference is that people like Gage and I would have remained consistent on this issue.
Oh,
but liberals and conservatives would have just flipped in their rhetoric.
Yeah.
That's all that would have happened. Conservatives would have been praising Trump for this decision. Liberals would have been saying the same thing that conservatives are right now. They don't actually have any ideological consistency.
They don't fucking care.
They don't.
Exactly.
They only care about praising their people.
Most Americans, considering that, 80% of the electorate votes on party lines.
Yeah.
And that's just out of 66% of people that vote.
Yeah, party's definitely the biggest indicator of how someone's going to vote every single time.
Yeah.
But, whatever. I would take this all, if you are somebody that doesn't know a ton about the history in the Middle East, I would just take this as a lesson, not why we should have stayed, but why we should have never gotten involved to begin with.
Yes.
Because us getting involved has been disastrous for ourselves. We've lost people. Our troops have died to it. We've spent trillions of dollars over there. And it's also been disastrous for the region in general and for the people that live there and all the innocent bystanders that have lived in Afghanistan.
I think it's 5,000 combined U.S. and UN soldiers have died in Afghanistan, whereas 500,000 Afghan civilians and fighters have also died.
Yeah.
It's incredibly disproportionate, but also it's important to remember that not getting involved in the region doesn't mean not going after Osama.
Oh, yeah.
We could have done that through a myriad of other ways. We did not need necessarily a ground invasion.
And when I say this is a lesson to not get involved in future countries' business in the future, that doesn't mean necessarily that I don't want us to have any kind of foreign policy. It's just that we should use our diplomatic levers of power rather than sending our military in to just kill people.
Yes.
Because that's never going to actually resolve the issue. In most cases, it's never going to actually solve the issue.
Mm-hmm. And
got to be diplomatic.
Just to further that point, let's dive into the history of Afghanistan for a little bit.
Here we go.
So we've been there for 20 years now with the goal of building up the Afghan forces, and the Taliban seized the country in basically a week.
Mm-hmm.
Literally, what did we do?
But, in like a business week.
Exactly.
It took 5 days.
In a couple business days. Yeah, they could have taken the weekend off and still done it. But when we look at the history of the region, we see that global powers have been trying and failing to occupy Afghanistan for literally centuries. It's nicknamed the Graveyard of Empires, right? Let's examine why.
Oh, that's fun.
Let's examine why. Starting in 1830 in the First Anglo-Afghan War, the British invaded Afghanistan because they wanted to protect British India from the Russians. It's always the fucking Russians for some reason.
Yep.
This particular invasion started because the Afghan ruler was getting a little bit too buddy-buddy with Russia. The war ended with almost complete and total destruction of the invading British forces, with only one soldier surviving to tell the tale.
One guy?
Yeah.
The one who got away. I bet he's got some survivor guilt. Or
literally one guy survived to get back to British territory and tell him what happened. They completely massacred the British army, right?
Okay.
So that ended the First Anglo-Afghan War. The Second Anglo-Afghan War started again in 1875 when, again, Russian influence was growing in Afghanistan, and thus the British started another war. The Russians, again, 40 years later. The first phase of the war ended with the Treaty of Gandamak. I'm probably butchering that name, right? And so in the treaty specifically, areas of Afghanistan were given to the British as well as jurisdiction over certain passes and valleys. Also, Afghan foreign relations were to be completely controlled by the British Empire.
Oh, that sounds pretty liberating for the Afghan people.
Oh, yes. So now, after that first treaty, Afghanistan and the people of Afghanistan, their diplomats, couldn't control any of their foreign policy decisions, right? Yeah. Even though they wanted to be friends with Russia. They wanted to do all that. Now Britain took over. So, as a result of that, we see that a faction of the military broke off, right? They were dissatisfied with the treaty. Why wouldn't there be? They're no longer a sovereign country, basically. They're just another British colony. So they broke off, and they slaughtered the British forces in Kabul.
Round two.
That's
round two, baby.
Absolutely massacred the British forces in Kabul again. And so that sparked the second phase of the war, which ended swiftly. Again, it only lasted a year, as the British quickly regained control of Kabul and a new Afghan leader was instilled. That's how that war ended, right? Second Anglo-Afghan War. And then we have 40 years of Afghanistan under British foreign policy rule, right? They're just dictating whatever the country does. And foreign policy is very important, especially back then in the age of empires, right? So then the Third Anglo-Afghan War starts right after World War I. But during World War I, the Afghan people were growing very dissatisfied with their British, specifically the control of the foreign policy as per the Treaty of Gandamak. The dissatisfaction culminated in the assassination of the Afghan ruler by the people. The next ruler then declared independence from the British, launching the Third Anglo-Afghan War in 1919, right after World War I completed, and the British troops were just demoralized and
decimated.
Feeling very defeated after the First World War. And so the war only lasted a few months. With the Afghans' newfound foreign policy freedom, they aligned themselves with the new Soviet government, because this is 2 years after the October Revolution.
Yeah, okay.
And Lenin and their party, the Bolsheviks, just took over. So then the Afghan War, fast forward to 1978, right? This is the Afghan War, the modern-day Afghan War. This is where it started. There was a coup that overthrew the centrist government of Afghanistan and implemented a new Marxist-Leninist government. I'm sure the tankies love that. Naturally, that Marxist-Leninist government grew very close with the Soviet Union.
Yeah, okay.
This government had virtually no support from the people and was ruthless to the political dissenters and launched reforms the population hated. In response to these conditions, the Mujahideen was formed to fight back.
Oh, boy.
Oh, boy. The Russians then invaded Afghanistan to try to quell the freedom fighters. However, they wanted to leave the responsibility of dealing with the Mujahideen to the Afghan army, an Afghan that saw mass desertions and was largely ineffective. Ring a bell?
Yeah.
Ring a bell?
Yeah.
Anyways, the United States saw an opportunity here. In foreign policy actions that boiled down to the enemy of my enemy is my friend, the United States shipped weapons and money to the Mujahideen and funneled them through Pakistan. I wonder why Pakistan then became a haven for these same terrorist groups later on in the war with the United States.
Oh, and we hated that.
Yeah, I wonder. I wonder why they harbored these people. One notable person on the U.S. payroll was Mr. 9/11 himself, Osama bin Laden.
Mr. 9/11.
Mr. 9/11 himself, Osama bin Laden. Keep that in mind. We knew the Mujahideen was filled with religious fundamentalists. It was basically all religious fundamentalists, right?
Yeah.
And we also knew that the Mujahideen as a whole wasn't operating like a traditional organized military. They were a bunch of splintered factions trying to, with a common goal. They all operated different sects, the Al-Qaeda, the other branches that I can't pronounce because they're not as quote-unquote popular.
Yeah.
They're doing their own thing with the common goal of, I guess, liberating the Afghan people and then coming together in an Islamic state, right? So that's going on. We didn't care about any of that. So later on, when the Soviets withdrew its troops in 1989, just later on the Soviets did withdraw its troops in 1989. Then in 1992, the communist government was overthrown, and there was a power-sharing agreement between the various factions between the Mujahideen. Spoiler alert, it did not go well at all.
Nah.
And the countryside devolved into a battleground that would just be going on until 2001, when the Taliban began to take control. And I think we all know what happened in 2001, right?
Very specific date.
So then the United States gets involved as retaliation for 9/11 and thinks they can do what every other empire has failed to do that got involved within the region. The Russians couldn't do it.
It's American exceptionalism, baby.
Exactly. The British couldn't do it at the height of their, I guess not the height of their power, but they were still a fucking powerhouse, right?
Yeah.
The British couldn't do it, and we thought that we could.
Surprise, surprise, we didn't.
We
literally didn't.
Fast forward to now, today, right now, it's basically back to where it was in 2001, before 9/11, before we got involved. The Taliban are just running over everything.
It's almost as if a major power in the world squeezing a nation for all of its resources and political power results in just chaos.
Exactly.
Almost as if that happens every single time. It's almost as if we can't learn from the past.
It's almost as if we shouldn't just engage in nation building.
Yeah.
And we should just worry about our own people. You know?
And I want to point out that a lot of the U.S. foreign policy during the 70s, 80s, and 90s was for the express purpose of bankrupting the Soviet Union.
Oh my God.
And people have said
100%.
this. Hillary Clinton said this, that the point of funding the Mujahideen, which eventually became, well, part of it became Al-Qaeda, the point of doing that was to bankrupt the Soviet Union, and it backfired on us in like a matter of decades.
100%. All of our our fetishization with anti-communism and anti-communist measures always backfired on us.
Yeah.
Vietnam backfired on us. This backfired on us. What worked?
Nothing.
Like, domino theory was proven wrong within Vietnam. This was also right after Vietnam is when all this started. We started funding these freedom fighters. Like, come on.
Yeah, and there's so much rhetoric, especially in like the empires of the world, like the United States and I guess the UK back then, but even still, that we need to like protect the sovereignty of our own nations. But then we just violate other sovereign nations all the time. And I get getting involved when there's violations of human rights. I think we have to do that to some extent. But the answer is never going to be funding extremist groups that then attack us and then using that as justification to destabilize the entire region for the next 2 decades, wasting American taxpayer dollars.
It's like, and this isn't the first time we've implemented a theocracy instead of communism.
Yeah.
Like, that we've sponsored coups to get rid of communism in favor of theocracy. We did it again in Iran in the 60s.
Yeah.
So
we've done it many times.
Yeah, multiple times, specifically in the Middle East. But it's
Talk about the death squads in Nigeria.
Yeah, the Contras. Almost every single component of our intervention within Afghanistan has been a repetition of history's failure. It's stay out of the fucking region from now on.
Hopefully, moving forward, we probably won't, but hopefully the powers of the world can learn to just leave them alone.
Yes.
Get involved when we want to protect the Afghan people from atrocities that whatever governing power may be committing, but we don't need to send a bunch of troops in just to sit there for 20 years and do absolutely
guard
nothing.
Some poppy fields.
Right, exactly. My freedom's not over there, dog.
Exactly. Yeah, this is all besides the fact that our intervention in the Middle East in general is often just to turn the cogs within the military-industrial machine.
Yeah.
And just
line
people's pockets.